Welcome to the Fear and Greed Daily Interview. I'm Sean Aylmer. Right now in the UK, we're seeing a political crisis play out in real time. Liz Truss became the UK Prime Minister just 6 weeks ago. Now, after an ill-conceived tax cut plan, a sacked Chancellor and a policy backflip, Liz Truss is under intense pressure with calls from colleagues in the business community for her to quit. Latika Bourke is a journalist with the Age and Sydney Morning Herald based in London. Latika, welcome back to Fear and Greed. What the hell is going on?
Yeah, well, it does look likely we'll see another prime ministerial change, maybe within hours, maybe within days, maybe within weeks, maybe within months, but it does have a certain inevitability to it.
How did she go so wrong? How did Liz Truss go so wrong?
A couple of things. I think the first thing to say is that she's thoroughly unsuited to the job. And She did not enjoy the support of MPs when she was running for this. Her rival, Rishi Sunak, always and consistently from day one had the majority of MPs. So the number of Conservatives who thought they could work with him and that he would be a vote winner at the ballot box. Secondly, there is not only an unsuitability to Liz Truss's own qualifications for this job, but a kind of arrogance. And I think this is actually where they've really tripped up. Anyone can learn in the job, but Truss came into this job thinking, I am going to blow up, literally they call it the blob. And the best way to think about that is some kind of deep state civil service bureaucracy orthodoxy, which to some degree does need challenging. But she came in with this mission that they were going to blow this show up and teach them once and for all what a low tax economy looked like, how successful it would be, and how popular it would be. And of course, as we know, that was a fatal misjudgment. There is a reason why Conservative leaders have not done this past.
Not even Boris Johnson did that.
I mean, this is actually part of the story. Boris Johnson doesn't really have a kind of philosophical outline or guiding principle to him other than two things, really, and I think that's ambition and this desire and need to be loved by the public. And that actually, in the eyes of many Tory MPs and those particularly who did support Liz Truss, they felt that led Boris astray from the original Brexit mission. And there's kind of two sorts of Brexits that are in the mind of those who supported Brexit. One is this idea of a Singapore on Thames, where Brexiting would lead you to be able to create a really low tax economy, some of these agenda items that we've seen from Truss. And then the other side were saying, no, actually, we just want to control the immigration, grow our wages, grow more local industry, and have some freedom about who we trade with in the terms and conditions. And they're two drastically and radically different sorts of Brexits. And Boris Johnson, because of his incapability to, one, even think about policy seriously, but two, execute it if it harmed or hurt or meant a difficult conversation with anyone in the public, meant that that first model of Brexit was getting lost. And if you talked to a lot of the Brexiteers, and I would say this, I'd say, a couple of years on from Brexit, it's very difficult to identify what the tangible benefits are for the ordinary person. And they would say, well, that's because Brexit hasn't been done properly. And they laid that at the feet of Boris Johnson, which is why when time came for Boris Johnson, when his time was eventually up, a whole section of that party found themselves not looking towards Rishi Sunak because they saw him as part and parcel of that problem. They looked to Liz Truss. Unfortunately, their guiding light has flamed spectacularly and looks to be burning out within days.
Singapore on the Thames is a great description. Even any pragmatist wouldn't say that's ever going to work, though, would it?
Look, I think if the time it was going to work was probably about 2 decades ago, you cannot have this sort of agenda in the current context where we've just come out of a COVID pandemic. People are very used to looking to the government to not only pay to fix problems or pay to accommodate external shocks that they weren't expecting, but also to tell them what to do. We have a very different dynamic and a relationship between the public and the state. And that's even in a country that didn't take COVID as seriously or you didn't treat it with the harsh responses that we saw in Australia and some of the other Asian countries.
Stay with me, Latika. We'll be back in a minute. My guest this morning is Latika Bourke, Sydney Morning Herald and the Age journalist based in London. Okay, taking all that into account, suddenly the UK seems like Italy of a decade ago. Just the political instability is quite phenomenal.
Well, some might say Italy, others might say Australia, Sean.
Of a decade ago, that's true. Yeah.
A little fun fact is that if and when, and we do expect it to be when, the Tories roll Liz Truss, the UK will then have as many living former prime ministers as Australia.
Is that right?
It
There you
is.
go. But I mean, it must be destabilising in terms of policy settings for individuals, for businesses, for regulators, for the whole economy.
Yeah, I mean, the financial issue is really serious. Don't for a second underestimate how close pension funds were to falling over, and that was why you saw this extraordinary intervention from the Bank of England, which of course is going to be in turn inflationary, and anyone who has a mortgage like I do, we're going to be looking at, maybe interest rates a couple of percentage points higher than they might otherwise have been this time next year. On top of that, with an energy crisis caused by the war in Ukraine. Now, if this winter is really cold, we have already been told here in the UK that we're facing a scenario where we could have 3 to 4 hour blackouts in the middle of winter.
Wow.
That's a serious amount of time in a cold temperature country. And we are not seeing anybody really talk about this. Ironically, the whole wham bam, thank you ma'am tax package that Liz Truss came out with at the start of her premiership was actually about announcing energy relief. But it was so big, it's going to cost £60 billion for the first 6 months, £10 billion a month of borrowing, that people were alarmed by the lack of restraint there. And they thought that it should have been tapered towards perhaps people on benefits, and that actually a lot of people who live in Knightsbridge don't really need the government to bail them out of high energy prices, however scarily high they might be. So there is a lot of debating to be had about how to deal with these crises. And you're right, Sean, that debate is not happening.
What are people on the street thinking about this?
Well, I was on the bus yesterday and 2 young girls behind me, one of them was listening to a podcast, I imagine, because she shouts out to a friend, "Oh, they're going to get rid of her, the Prime Minister, she's gone." And then the other one says, "Oh, who's next?" And I thought that conversation just summed it all up, because, Liz Truss does not have, and she has never had and will never have, this sort of emotional connection with the British public that Boris Johnson had, that David Cameron had, that Tony Blair had. One, she's a very new Prime Minister, obviously. Her elevation came at a time where people are really jaded with politics, and certainly with the Conservative Party. The public was already starting to get over this party that's had a long time in office here. But also people didn't even know this woman's name a year ago, and suddenly she's their Prime Minister. So I think that when she does go, you're not actually going to see the sort of costs that we saw with the change with Boris, because the public relationship is just not there.
I mean, who gets the job? There's still a couple of years, isn't there, till a general election? So it may be a poison chalice, but if Liz Truss goes, as you are suggesting she will, someone will have to take that role for the next 18 months to 2 years.
And this is the best question, Sean, because the only reason Liz Truss is still in the job is because the party is so divided. And this is largely due to Brexit. Brexit really drove or created ruptures within the parliamentary party that weren't necessarily there before. And these factions are so at war and so entrenched in who they perceive to have slighted them or backstabbed Boris or betrayed the Brexit legacy or whatever gripe they have today or tomorrow, that they cannot come around a single candidate. The moment they could, there would be that tap on the shoulder and Liz Truss would be gone.
Yeah.
And the fact that she's still in the job means they can't decide whether it's Rishi Sunak, who, of course, ran for the job against Liz Truss, and he got a whole bunch of Boris Johnson supporters offside because he was seen to have backstabbed Boris Johnson, but also presided over an increase in taxes, something Liz Truss said she was going to fix. She, of course, came in, tried to fix it, and is now running a taxing economy almost comparable to what Rishi Sunak was suggesting. And maybe by the time Jeremy Hunt, the new Chancellor, is done, taxes may even be higher than they were at the 70-year high level when Rishi Sunak was the Chancellor. So there's a piece of irony for you. The other candidate everyone would like to run is Ben Wallace, the Defence Secretary, but he's ruled himself out twice now. And then you come down to some lower order candidates. There's Penny Mordaunt, who I think is a Liz 2.0 candidate, but seems to enjoy a lot of support in the Conservative Party. Jeremy Hunt, now that he's in the Chancellorship, would be in position. And then you've got some others like Kemi Badenoch, who is a complete clean skin and very inexperienced. But if you're talking about a change 2 years out from an election, the Conservative Party is in the mode of saving furniture. The polls coming out right now are suggesting that their 80-seat majority could be reduced to something akin to 30-plus seats in the Parliament. This sort of wipeout is, I mean, it's not even a wipeout. As Nadine Dorry is a big supporter of Boris Johnson said yesterday, this is extinction. Yeah. That's what they'd be facing. So this would be generational, and anyone who comes in, their sole task will be to simply save furniture.
Latika, maybe it's time to come home. You don't want to be living over there for too long.
It's a very exciting time to be in the UK. I mean,
that's true.
When I landed here in 2016, I did think I was coming to a country that was going to be a bit more grown up with its politics and a bit more stable, having just come from 8 years in the Canberra Press Gallery where drama had played out during my entire career there. And I kind of feel like I brought the infection to the UK.
It follows you. Yeah, I think that's right.
Ever since I've been here, we've had David Cameron, Theresa May, Boris Johnson, Liz Truss, maybe Rishi Sunak, but certainly a fifth. We've had Brexit, 2 elections, and then, of course, the huge, I guess, global moment this year when the Queen died. And it does feel like Britain is very central to what's going on for good and for bad.
Latika, thank you for talking to Fear and Greed.
Thank you.
That was Latika Bourke, a journalist with the Age and the Sydney Morning Herald based in London. This is the Fear and Greed Daily Interview. Join us every morning for the full episode of Fear and Greed, Australia's most popular business podcast. I'm Sean Aylmer. Enjoy your day.